When billionaire Richard Hawthorne mocked the elderly black waitress for dropping a glass, the entire restaurant laughed until she calmly said 7 words that turned his face white. Richard Hawthorne had spent his entire life believing there were only 2 kinds of people in the world, those with power, and those who existed to serve them. At 54, he wore his wealth like armor. His tailored Italian suits. His custom gold watch. His penthouse overlooking Central Park. His reputation as the man who could make or destroy careers with a single phone call. And on that cold Friday evening in Manhattan, as he entered the private dining hall of the Wellington Club surrounded by investors and board members, Richard carried himself the way kings must have walked into their courts centuries ago. The wealthy men around him laughed too loudly at his jokes. The women smiled too carefully. The staff lowered their eyes when he passed. Everyone in that room feared him. Everyone except one woman. Her name was Evelyn Carter. At 68 years old, Evelyn had worked at the Wellington Club for nearly 6 years. Her gray curls were pinned neatly beneath her uniform cap. Her hands were worn with age, but steady. Her posture remained graceful despite the long shifts that left her knees aching every night. Most guests barely looked at her. That was fine with Evelyn. Invisible people heard everything. She balanced a silver tray of crystal glasses as she approached Richard's table, where he and 6 executives sat discussing a merger worth hundreds of millions. Top off the glasses, one of the men snapped without looking at her. Evelyn nodded politely. As she leaned forward to pour the wine, Richard glanced up and froze for half a second. His eyes narrowed. There was something about her face. Something disturbingly familiar. But before the thought could settle, one of his associates barked a laugh and slapped Richard's shoulder, pulling his attention away. Evelyn continued serving silently. Then Richard noticed the slight tremor in her hand. He smirked. "Well," he said loudly enough for nearby tables to hear, "looks like the retirement home is hiring out its residents now." The men at the table burst into laughter. Evelyn remained silent. She kept pouring. Richard leaned back in his chair, enjoying the attention. "You all right there, Grandma?" he mocked. "Need us to get you a walker?" More laughter. Several guests turned to watch. A younger waitress near the bar winced. Evelyn's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. She had endured cruelty before. Rich men who thought tipping gave them the right to degrade others. Entitled women who snapped fingers in her face. Children of privilege who treated workers like furniture. But Richard's voice. That voice stirred something old inside her. Something buried. As she reached to refill another glass, one of the executives shifted suddenly in his chair. His elbow bumped the tray. A crystal wineglass slipped. It shattered against the floor. The room went quiet. Richard shot to his feet. "You incompetent old fool," he thundered. Every conversation in the restaurant stopped. Dozens of eyes turned toward them. Evelyn bent immediately. "I apologize, sir." "No!" Richard shouted. "Don't apologize. Look at me when I'm speaking to you." She slowly straightened. He stepped closer, towering over her. "Do you know how much that glass cost?" Evelyn said nothing. "That glass costs more than your monthly paycheck." A few nervous chuckles came from his table. Richard's lip curled. "People like you should be grateful anyone lets you work at your age. Worthless old woman." The words hit the room like a slap. Even his own associates looked slightly uncomfortable now. But Richard wasn't finished. He jabbed a finger toward the shattered glass. "Clean it up. Then disappear before your face ruins my appetite." Silence. Evelyn stared at him. Longer than anyone expected. And then, for the first time all night, she smiled. Not warmly. Not politely. A small, cold smile. Richard frowned. Something about it unsettled him. Then Evelyn leaned slightly closer. And in a calm, quiet voice only he could hear, she said, "You should have buried all the witnesses, Richard." His entire body went rigid. The color drained from his face instantly. His breathing stopped. The room blurred around him. No. No, no, no. That voice. That sentence. His heart slammed against his ribs. He stared at her. Really stared at her. And suddenly, he saw it. Beneath the age. Beneath the gray hair. Beneath the wrinkles time had carved into her face. He recognized her. Impossible. His voice came out barely above a whisper. "You." Evelyn stepped back. Her pleasant server smile returned as if nothing had happened. She bowed her head slightly. "I'll clean the mess immediately, sir." Richard couldn't move. Couldn't speak. His hands trembled violently. One of his board members laughed awkwardly. "Richard? You all right?" But Richard kept staring at Evelyn as she knelt to gather the broken glass. His mind was no longer in the restaurant. It was 15 years in the past. To blood. Concrete. Sirens. Bribes. Screaming families. And one woman crying over a body bag. No. No, this couldn't be happening. He had made sure everything was buried. Every witness silenced. Every report altered. Every official paid off. He had personally ensured the scandal died before it could destroy him. So how was she here? Why now? And what did she know? Evelyn rose slowly with the dustpan in hand. She met his eyes one last time. Then walked away. Richard sank into his chair. His guests exchanged confused glances. What the hell was that? One asked. Richard ignored him. His mind raced. If Evelyn Carter was here, then she hadn't forgotten. Which meant she might still have something. Evidence. Proof. Witness records. God help him. She might have everything. And for the first time in over a decade, Richard Hawthorne felt fear. Real fear. Because the woman he had just humiliated in front of an entire room was not powerless. She was the ghost of the only crime he had never truly escaped. And now, she had finally stepped back into his life. The rest of the evening at the Wellington Club continued as if nothing had happened. Laughter returned to tables. Glasses clinked again. Business deals resumed in quiet tones. But for Richard Hawthorne, the world had shifted off its axis. He sat frozen in his chair, barely hearing the conversation around him. Every few seconds, his eyes drifted back toward the service corridor where Evelyn had disappeared. "She's just a waitress," one of his board members finally said, trying to ease the tension. "Don't let it get to you." Richard forced a thin smile. "Yes," he muttered. "Just a waitress." But even as he said it, his jaw tightened. Because his mind refused to believe it. Just a waitress does not look at you like that. Just a waitress does not speak your name like a threat. Just a waitress does not make your past feel like it is breathing again. By the time dinner ended, Richard had barely touched his food. He excused himself early, claiming an urgent call. Outside, the cold Manhattan air hit his face like a shock. He pulled out his phone immediately. His assistant answered on the first ring. "Sir?" "Run a name check," Richard said quickly. "Evelyn Carter. Waitress at the Wellington Club. I need everything. Now." There was a pause. "Yes, sir." Richard ended the call and leaned against his black car, gripping the phone tightly. His reflection stared back at him from the window. For the first time in years, he didn't look untouchable. He looked unsettled. And that terrified him more than anything. Meanwhile, inside the Wellington Club, Evelyn Carter finished her shift like she always did. Quietly. Precisely. Without drawing attention. No one would guess what had just happened at table 7. No one would guess that the billionaire everyone admired had gone pale the moment she spoke. She changed out of her uniform in the small staff room, folding it carefully. Another waitress, Maria, glanced at her. "You okay, Evelyn? That guy was awful tonight." Evelyn smiled faintly. "I've heard worse." Maria hesitated. "He looked like he knew you." Evelyn paused for half a second. Then she simply said, "Men like him always think they've forgotten the people they hurt." And she walked out. That night, Evelyn didn't go home immediately. Instead, she took the subway 2 stops further than usual and walked through a quiet residential street. The city lights blurred above her. But her mind was not in the present. It was 15 years earlier. A construction site. Rain. Screaming. Chaos. Her son, Daniel Carter, had been working his first job in a major development project. He was 24. Full of dreams. Full of life. He had called her that morning. "I'll bring you dinner after my shift, Mom." That was the last conversation they ever had. But collapse happened just after 4:30 p.m. A structural failure no one was supposed to talk about. But people did talk, quietly. Because Daniel wasn't the only one who died. 3 workers. 2 injured. 1 missing report. And 1 company that buried everything. Hawthorne Development Group. Richard Hawthorne. Evelyn stopped walking. The memory pressed against her chest like a weight. Back then, she had worked in legal transcription. She had access to internal files through a contract firm. And what she saw was not an accident. It was negligence. And worse. A cover-up ordered at the highest level. Bribes. Altered safety logs. Disappearing witnesses. And Daniel's name quietly erased from official records within weeks. When she tried to speak up, doors closed. Lawyers disappeared. Threats followed. So she stopped fighting publicly. But she never stopped remembering. Evelyn reached her small apartment building and climbed the stairs slowly. Inside her home, she turned on a small desk lamp and sat down at a wooden table. She opened a drawer. Inside were old files. Carefully preserved. Yellowed with time. But intact. Photographs. Internal memos. Recorded statements. And 1 document that had never been submitted. Her own written testimony. She traced her fingers over Daniel's name. Her son. Her voice cracked slightly, but she did not cry. Not yet. Because something had changed tonight. After 15 years of silence, Richard Hawthorne had finally seen her face. And more importantly, he had recognized her. That meant one thing. He remembered too. Evelyn closed the folder gently. "No more hiding," she whispered. Outside, thunder rolled faintly over the city. And in another part of Manhattan, Richard Hawthorne was about to discover that fear, once awakened, does not sleep easily again. Richard Hawthorne didn't sleep that night. He sat in his penthouse office overlooking the glowing skyline of Manhattan, staring at a screen that felt heavier with every passing minute. His assistant had delivered the file. Evelyn Carter. What he saw made his stomach tighten. Former legal transcription contractor. Access to corporate legal documentation firms. Employment history spanning multiple legal consulting offices. Clean record. No criminal background. No public complaints. At first glance, she looked harmless. But Richard knew better. Because buried inside the file was a note flagged by his own company's risk department years ago. Carter, Evelyn, potential exposure risk related to Hawthorne development internal incident, 2011. Richard's hand tightened around his glass. So she wasn't just a waitress. She had been inside the system. Close enough to see things that should have stayed buried. He exhaled sharply. "This is impossible," he muttered. But even as he said it, his reflection in the glass looked unsure. He opened another file, older, encrypted, harder to retrieve. The 2011 incident. Project Hollow Ridge. The construction collapse. 3 dead workers. Official report, structural fatigue due to unforeseen weather impact. Unofficial truth. Corners cut. Safety inspections bypassed. Reports altered. And buried beneath it all, a witness list that had mysteriously disappeared within 48 hours. Richard leaned back slowly. His pulse began to rise. Because now he remembered something he had tried very hard to forget. There had been a woman. A legal contractor who had questioned the report. Who had demanded access to raw data. Who had been persistent. Her name had been mentioned only once in internal discussions before everything was shut down. Evelyn Carter. But they had handled it. Or so he believed. He stood up abruptly and walked to the window. "I dealt with this," he said aloud, as if the city itself owed him an answer. But the silence outside did not respond. For the first time in years, Richard Hawthorne felt something unfamiliar. Loss of control. Meanwhile, Evelyn was not waiting. She had already begun preparing. Inside her apartment, the desk was covered with organized chaos. Documents, printed emails, scanned reports, handwritten notes. But this was not emotion. This was structure. Evelyn Carter had spent 15 years building one thing. Proof. Every file she had kept was cross-referenced. Every statement verified. Every inconsistency highlighted. And tonight, after seeing Richard's face at the club, something clicked. He remembered her. Which meant he feared her. Which meant she was finally close enough. She opened her laptop and inserted an old encrypted USB drive. A folder appeared. Hollow_ridge_final_backup. Her finger hovered over the file. Inside was everything. Internal emails between executives. Altered inspection logs. Audio recording from a site supervisor. Financial transfers tied to bribery. And one crucial piece. A witness suppression order signed under Richard Hawthorne's approval code. Evelyn stared at it for a long moment. Then she whispered. "You tried to erase my son, but you left your signature behind." She closed the laptop. Not yet. Revealing it now would be too early. She needed something stronger. Something undeniable. Something public. A way to make sure Richard didn't just fall quietly, but completely. The next morning, Manhattan woke up as if nothing was wrong. Skyscrapers shined. Traffic moved. Business resumed. Richard arrived at his corporate headquarters surrounded by security. He looked composed. Controlled. But inside, his mind was still trapped in last night's memory. Evelyn's voice. 7 words. "You should have buried all the witnesses, Richard." He entered the elevator alone and stared at his reflection. For a moment, he wondered something he hadn't allowed himself to consider in years. How many witnesses had there been? And had he truly found them all? The elevator doors opened. His chief legal advisor was waiting. "Sir," she said quickly, "there's something you need to see." Richard followed her into the boardroom. A large screen displayed a newsfeed. His eyes narrowed. Breaking headline. Anonymous whistleblower threatens to expose major construction cover-up tied to Hawthorne development. Richard's face tightened instantly. "What is this?" he demanded. The lawyer hesitated. We don't know yet, but whoever it is has internal level access. Richard didn't blink. Because he already knew. Somewhere in the city. The waitress wasn't just cleaning tables anymore. She was preparing war. The headline didn't stay quiet for long. By midday, it had already spread beyond financial news circles. Blogs picked it up. Then smaller media outlets. Then social media. And with every repost, the story gained weight. No names were officially confirmed yet, but the pattern was clear enough for people to speculate. A major construction project. A billionaire developer. A hidden collapse. And a whistleblower with access to internal records. Richard Hawthorne sat in his boardroom watching the coverage unfold in real time. The room around him was tense. His advisors spoke in low voices, careful not to trigger him. But Richard wasn't listening. He was calculating. "This isn't random," he said finally. "No, sir," his legal advisor replied. "It's targeted. Whoever is doing this knows our internal structure." Richard leaned forward slowly. "Find out who leaked it." "We're trying," she said. "But the access trail is encrypted and routed through multiple proxies. It's sophisticated." That word irritated him. Sophisticated meant deliberate. Deliberate meant planned. And planned meant someone had been waiting. He stood up abruptly. "Shut it down," he snapped. "I don't care how. I want every mention erased within the hour." There was a pause. "Sir, that may not be possible. It's already outside our control." Silence fell over the room. For Richard Hawthorne, that sentence was unacceptable. Nothing was supposed to be outside his control. He walked toward the window, fists tightening. And for the first time in years, he realized something unsettling. Money wasn't stopping this. Power wasn't stopping this. Something else was driving it. Something personal. Across the city, Evelyn Carter sat in a small public library, far from her apartment. No one paid attention to her. She preferred it that way. Her laptop was open, but she wasn't watching the news. She was watching reactions. Comments. Threads. Speculation. The story was spreading exactly as planned, but carefully controlled. Not enough to expose everything yet. Just enough to apply pressure. Beside her sat a simple notebook. Inside it, she had written 3 names. Richard Hawthorne was only the first. There were others who signed off on the cover-up. Others who buried reports. Others who stayed silent. This was never just about one man. It was about everyone who allowed him to remain untouchable. Evelyn closed her laptop. Then she looked at a printed photograph on the table. Her son, Daniel. Smiling. Young. Alive. "I'm almost there," she whispered. Her hand tightened slightly over the photo. "But I need him to break first." Back at Hawthorne Development Headquarters, panic was beginning to surface. Employees whispered in hallways. Executives avoided eye contact. Security was increased. And Richard was no longer pretending to be calm. He stood alone in his office, staring at the city skyline like it had betrayed him. His phone rang. Unknown number. He answered immediately. A pause. Then a soft voice. Female. Calm. Familiar. "You remember me now, don't you?" Richard's grip tightened instantly. "Who is this?" A faint pause on the line. Then. "I think you called me worthless yesterday." His blood went cold. He didn't need confirmation. He already knew. Evelyn. He turned sharply, scanning the empty office as if she were physically there. "What do you want?" he said tightly. There was a soft sound on the other end, almost like a breath. "I want you to remember everything you buried. Richard's jaw clenched. This is extortion. No, Evelyn replied calmly. This is memory. The line went silent for a moment. Then her voice changed, slightly harder now. You thought time erased what you did. Another pause. But time only gave me time to prepare. Richard's voice dropped. You don't have anything. A faint, almost sad laugh came through the phone. I have everything. Silence. For the first time since this began, Richard didn't respond immediately. Because something in her tone told him the truth wasn't coming. It was already here. Evelyn spoke one final line before ending the call. You should have looked at the workers' names more carefully, Richard. Click. The line went dead. Richard stood frozen. And slowly, the realization began to form. Not just fear anymore, but recognition. Because there had been a list once. Names he had approved for deletion. Names he never bothered to read closely. Until now. The morning of the press conference arrived with an unusual heaviness over Manhattan. Outside the Hawthorne development headquarters, cameras lined the streets. Reporters crowded behind barricades. Something big was coming, but no one knew exactly what. Inside the building, panic was no longer hidden. It was open. Executives moved quickly through hallways. Legal teams scrambled. Security doubled its presence at every entrance. And in the center of it all, Richard Hawthorne sat alone in the boardroom. No speeches today. No confident smirk. No controlled charm. Just silence. On the table in front of him lay a folder. Unopened. Delivered anonymously an hour earlier. No sender. No warning. Just a single label written in plain print. Open before you speak. Richard stared at it for a long time. Then slowly opened it. Inside. Photographs. Internal records. His own signature on authorization documents. Bribery transfers. And witness suppression orders. But the final page made his breath stop completely. A single sheet of paper. A death record. Daniel Carter. Cause, workplace structural collapse. Status, officially dismissed as accidental fatality. Below it. A handwritten note. He called me that morning. He said he'd bring me dinner. Richard's hand began to shake. For the first time in his life, he felt something crack inside him. Not fear. Not anger. Something worse. Understanding. The door behind him opened slowly. A security officer stepped in. Sir, the press is ready. Richard didn't respond. Because his eyes were fixed on the name. Daniel Carter. And now he remembered. Not the report. Not the meeting. But the face. A young worker. Laughing on site. Waving to co-workers. Gone too soon. He had never cared to look deeper. Because it was just paperwork. Just numbers. Just acceptable loss. The realization hit him like a physical blow. This wasn't just a scandal. This was a life. A son. A mother. And everything he had built was standing on it. Outside, the press conference began. Richard walked onto the stage surrounded by cameras. Flashbulbs erupted instantly. He adjusted the microphone. For a moment, he said nothing. The crowd waited. Then, from the back of the hall, a door opened. Evelyn Carter walked in. No uniform today. No tray. Just a simple dark coat. And a presence that silenced the room without effort. Whispers spread immediately. Is that the whistleblower? The waitress? What is she doing here? Richard saw her. And froze. Not because she was dangerous, but because she was calm. Too calm. She stepped forward slowly until she stood near the stage. Their eyes met. Years of silence. Years of pain. Years of buried truth. Finally in the same room. Richard's voice cracked slightly. Evelyn. She nodded once. Yes. No anger in her tone. No shouting. Just certainty. Richard swallowed hard. I didn't know. She cut him off gently. You didn't care to know. Silence. The entire room felt it. Evelyn raised a small folder in her hand. This is everything, she said calmly. Every document. Every signature. Every payment. Every lie. Cameras zoomed in instantly. Richard stepped forward slightly. His voice lowered. What do you want? Evelyn looked at him for a long moment. Then she answered. I wanted you to remember my son's name. Silence again. Even the reporters stopped typing. Richard's face tightened. I didn't kill him, he said quietly. Evelyn nodded. No, she replied. But you decided his life was disposable. That sentence landed harder than anything else. Richard opened his mouth, but nothing came out. For the first time, there was no speech. No defense. No control. Only truth. Evelyn turned slightly toward the cameras. My son was not an accident, she said clearly. He was the cost of greed. She placed the folder on the podium. Then stepped back. Richard looked at it. Looked at her. And for a brief second, something inside him collapsed. Not his company. Not his empire. Him. The man. The illusion of invincibility. The cameras kept rolling. The truth was now public. Unstoppable. Unfixable. Evelyn turned to leave. Richard's voice broke one final time. Why didn't you come sooner? She stopped. Didn't turn back. Her answer was quiet. Because it needed to be. I needed you to feel what silence does. Then she walked out. Hours later, headlines exploded across every platform. Hawthorne Empire under federal investigation. Billionaire accused of cover-up in fatal construction scandal. Richard Hawthorne sat alone in his office as the city moved outside like nothing had changed. But everything had. His phone rang endlessly. He didn't answer. He just stared at the empty skyline. And for the first time in his life, there was no empire left to protect him. Only memory. And consequence.